guest today is Lindy Alexander. And as many of you will know, Lindy is an award-winning freelance food, travel and lifestyle writer. In 2020, she won the Best Food Travel Story in the awards for the Australian Society of Australian Travel Writers Award for Excellence. Her work has appeared in multiple places: The Age, The Guardian, Sunday Life, Good Food, Sydney Morning Herald. And as if that's not enough, she's also did a PhD in 2015. She's done research projects for the Starlight Foundation, the University of Melbourne, the Australian Breastfeeding Society. And if that wasn't enough, she also finds the time to run her own blog, The Freelancer's Year, where she publishes helpful content and advice for freelancers who are looking and hoping to make a living from writing. She was described recently by Rachel Smith of Rachel's List as a pitching legend. So no pressure, Lindy, and welcome to Freelance Legends.
Thank you. Gosh, I do, like listening to you say all those things, Oliver. I just feel like one of those really irritating overachievers. But I have, in our talk today, I've definitely got some clangers and mistakes that I want to share with you. So I want to put everyone's mind at ease that I am not some kind of guru that gets everything right 100% of the time.
Oh, well, that's good to know. It's good to know that you're human, but it's also important for everybody to understand that there's at least a little bit of credibility behind the advice that you're giving them today. You have built a very successful freelance business, and you've built a presence around providing advice and expertise. So we're very fortunate to have you, and thank you for taking the time. As we said before, we are broadcasting on Facebook Live. I am monitoring that feed. And so please do feel free to ask questions either there or here in the Zoom room, and we'll make sure they get relayed to Lindy. So what we're going to be talking about today is pitching. And regardless of the type of freelancer that you are, graphic designer, writer, marketing, anything, part of the work that you do is going to be convincing existing clients that of your ideas, and that obviously you can help them achieve whatever goals they have. Again, whether they're an existing client or a new client, somebody you haven't worked with. And pitching is also one of those things that is, for some, can be quite easy. For some, it can be incredibly difficult, in terms of understanding how to do it, where to do. So Lindy, as we said, has spent quite a lot of time talking to her community and writing a lot of content around pitching. And so we thought, what a great way to start 2021 off by deep diving into it and working at how we can get some momentum into the year for 2020. So do you want to add any opening comments, Lindy, before I dive into the questions? Is there anything you'd like to do to, set the scene for today's conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people feel scared about pitching. And I think even that idea, even the word of pitching kind of drums up these images of standing in front of a boardroom and pitching your ideas to kind of executives. But I actually think, and we'll talk about it, there are some really core ingredients that you need to put in a pitch. And once you kind of have those nailed down, I feel like the pressure kind of comes off a little bit. And so we can talk in detail what those are. And my sense is with pitching, in terms of improving your strike rate, there are small adjustments that writers, graphic designers, freelancers in general can make when they're approaching new or old clients or editors that can really boost your acceptance rate.
Excellent. So I think that's important to note, is that we're not putting this out today as a silver bullet that's going to fundamentally and wholesale change, but what we're talking about here is some incremental improvement that you'll be able to take along the way. And every single little 1%er eventually adds up to something quite profound, right? So
yeah, that's it. And I think there's that idea of the compound effect, so that you are making those gains where you can. And I think looking at it as a bit of an experiment, I think because pitching is so personal, because you're putting your ideas and often yourself out there, it can feel that when you get rejected, it can be difficult not to take that really personally. But actually, I think that there are lots of reasons why your pitch might not get across the line.
Okay, and I think we can talk about that, perhaps thinking about it from the client perspective as well, maybe down the track. So I wanted to start with a lot of the time pitching, I guess, it's a sales activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Essentially. It's selling an idea. And again, we don't, sometimes sales is a dirty word, but if we sort of just, bring it down to what it is, it's a sales pitch, right? Sales is sometimes a numbers game. The more shots you take, the more shots you hit.
Mm-hmm.
So I was keen to sort of get your thoughts to start with on, how often do you pitch, like for you, and how often would you be advising people to be making sure that they're, taking a shot?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a few things in your question there. And I guess for me, initially I felt the same. Like I felt that pitching was a sales activity. Recently, over the last few years, I reckon I've switched that, and I now think of it as a helping or a serving rather than a sales activity, because I think actually what you're doing is you're putting your ideas and yourself in front of an editor or a client, and you're saying, I think that I can engage or help your readers, or I think that I can help solve a problem, or that your company or organisation has. Or I can provide you with a solution that you want, but that you don't have. And so for me, immediately, I'm someone who hates the sales stuff. So I think for me to reframe that in terms of serving is much easier, just in terms of making that mindset shift initially. I think in terms of your second part of the question about, well, how often do you do it? I think it is a numbers game for sure, but I'm not a huge fan of the kind of spray and pray, like send out pictures to everyone and everything as quickly and as often as you can. I think that even if you're a beginner all the way through to an established freelancer, it's really about having a system and a vision for what you want, and that each pitch is a communication with a client or with an editor that hopefully will grow into a long-term relationship so that you don't have to pitch, right? I mean, what most of us want is for work that we love and that pays well to come to us. And so that kind of is for me the end goal. So initially when I first started freelance writing, I was sending out individual pictures. I had an idea, I think it would fit there. I have another idea, I think it might fit with that magazine. Then I realized there was no strategy, and I was writing for all these different publications, and I was churning through the work. But as soon as I started to focus and think about starting a conversation, these pictures are starting a conversation with the view of developing a long-term relationship, that all changed for me. So in terms of numbers, I think when you're starting, it's really good to think about is this a hobby for you, or is this a career? And if it's a career, you need to get some numbers behind you. So can you send out one pitch a day? That is probably what I would be aiming for.
Okay, one pitch a day. Well, that's I think that's and that was to my question about, is it different? Is it different for everybody? And again, I think it is different if it's a hobby versus somebody who's looking to maximise their potential earnings and build a career. The other comment I would make, again, going back to sales versus not sales, is I would suggest that your perhaps slightly more sophisticated approach to pitching is now as a result of your experience. And so perhaps you've become better at spotting opportunities, and you've got more experience of understanding how to maximize those opportunities. But that's come over the course of a career, right? It wasn't like that at the beginning.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I've just written down some examples that I want to share with you. Embarrassing examples of just, mistakes that I made and had to make in order to get where I am.
Well, I mean, what more of a perfect time for you to do that than now?
I mean, this is an example that I share quite a lot, is that when I started freelancing, I'd switched from a career in social work, and I was just dabbling in freelance writing, and I had a young son. And so I was really in the parenting headspace, and that's the kind of publication that I was pitching to. And I thought I had this really original idea of writing a story about reusable cloth nappies for a parenting magazine. And so I sent this pitch off, which was just about the growing popularity of cloth nappies. So this was 2014. So really, cloth nappies weren't a new trend. But for me, it was new. As a new parent, it was new. Anyway, I sent this pitch to the editor, and she wrote me the most lovely response, but you could almost hear her eyes rolling, because she was like, we have covered this in so many different ways. What is new about this topic? And I got her email back and thought, oh, like I really kicked myself and could really see that. And I think sometimes I had ideas, and I see this often in freelancers, we have ideas and we accept that idea at that level, and we don't dig any further to think, what is the story? Like, I've got my topic, but what is the story behind this? And then I went on to pitch her, and she commissioned me a lot, but I kept asking myself, well, so what? Like, what is the actual story behind that?
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think as we said before, I think we'll perhaps cover off maybe putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're pitching to a little bit later on.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask something that was perhaps a little bit more logistical, because if you are doing a pitch a day, that very quickly means that you've got emails and pitches and things at different points, and you know, it could quite easily become quite difficult to track. Yeah. How do you do that?
I've got two really simple Excel spreadsheets. And so I have like an ideas log, which is just in a Word document. So anytime I have an idea about a potential story, very unformed, if I'm near my computer, I put it into that document, or notes on my phone. And then when I come to pitch, I've got a really simple Excel spreadsheet, and I've written down the columns that I have in it. So I just have the publication that I'm going to pitch, what the idea is, the date that I sent the pitch, their response, if I've followed up, if I needed to follow up or not. If they say no, I write the reason why they say no, because I think this helps me understand the publication, but it also helps me have a bit of distance from feeling like I had a really crappy idea, because often it's budget or timing, or we've got a backlog of content and it's not necessarily about your idea. And then I have notes like about the pay, or whether they were responsive, or anything that I think will help me. So I have that, like I have this rolling Excel spreadsheet of all the pitches. So at a glance, I can see which pitches are still outstanding that I need to follow up on, and how many I'm sending each month, and if I am on track to kind of hit my targets.
Cool. And is that a template that do you make that available for anybody anywhere on your website, or is that something that you would share, or it's, you know, even just in the, not obviously not the data, the info, but the header, the structure?
Yeah, I mean, I could totally share it. I don't, but I think it's probably something that a lot of freelancers naturally do anyway, because after you start sending some pictures, you realize that you can't hold it all in your mind.
Yeah, fair enough. Excellent. Okay, so for you, what comes first, the idea or the client? I mean, and does it change? You know, like is that sort of different depending on where you're at, or is there a sort of a formalized process or a structure that you follow every time?
No, there's not a structure that I follow every time. I think it's pretty organic for me. So when I first started, I definitely had the kind of big name publications that I knew that I wanted to break into. And so almost every idea I had, I would interrogate that idea and think, could I pitch this to that publication? Like, would it stand up? Because I knew that those big name publications, you know, like your weekend newspaper, glossy magazines, or the magazines that are in the newsagents, I knew that they would be much more robust probably in what they wanted from a freelance writer than maybe some other publications. And so for me, it depends. If I really wanted to break into a publication, I analyze that publication. I look at the kind of stories and the tone and the style that they're publishing, and I might brainstorm, might go back to my Word document, look at the ideas that I've come up with and see if I can put a new spin on any of those ideas. Often though, my pitching process is much more finding a story idea and thinking, I wonder where that would be a good fit for. And that's kind of where my second spreadsheet comes in, which I think I'm so surprised that more freelancers don't have this, because one of the questions I get asked all the time is, where can I pitch this idea? And I was the same. When I started, I had about 5 publications that I knew about that I could pitch to. And actually there's hundreds, thousands of places that you can pitch to that will pay you well for your writing if you're a freelance writer. So I've got a spreadsheet that just has all the different publications, the editor contact details, and I've kind of categorized it by genre. So if I've got a health idea for a story, I'll just type in health in my little search box, and it'll bring up all those publications. So then I can go and find them and see if it would be a good fit.
Well, I think this might be a good time actually to take a question that we've just been asked by Kai. He says, obviously, you've got the idea, you've got your little black book, even though it's a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But even within those publications, there could be, you could, a lot of the time, you could just waste time by trying to speak to the wrong people. So how do you identify who to pitch to at an organizational level and then at a personal level? And then how do you follow through with that info?
Yeah, okay. So just say it's a corporate client, what I would usually do to find the right person, because there might be within an organisation, there might be all kinds of verticals like you mentioned. So if it's a corporate organisation that I want to do corporate writing work for, I go to LinkedIn and I look for the organisation. So in the search bar on LinkedIn, I type in the organisation's name, and then I'm typing in titles like communications manager or digital editor, titles that I think will be the right person to contact. Then I connect with them on LinkedIn, do a bit of sleuthing, try to find out their email address and send my pitch or my letter of introduction to them. With an editor, I think it's usually fairly straightforward, mostly, to find their contact details. So just say you've got a big publication like one of Australia's newspapers, there'll be like a lifestyle editor and a sports editor and an opinion editor. And usually with some Googling, you can find that. And if you're part of some writers' communities, usually my experience is that writers are incredibly generous with sharing contact details. And that's something for me, I do, because I don't think, I don't see a big deal about sharing contact details. In fact, I think it's really important. People have done it for me, and so I will happily share details if I have them.
Yeah, awesome. Well, guys, look, I can see that there's quite a few questions coming through. Just to let everybody know, whether you're in the Facebook Live feed or in the Zoom room, we will get to all of your questions. We'll just try and ask them in a way that sort of helps the flow of the conversation, but I promise you we will get to all of them. So we were talking about client versus content. So you sort of, just to go back to that, you were mentioning that really it just depends, which brings me to my next question. So just talk more broadly about how does your approach differ when you are pitching cold versus pitching to an existing client?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of pitching cold, there's an introduction that you need to make to yourself and to your work. Whereas when you're pitching to an existing client or editor, there's an informality, I think. So now I'm at a point where with some of my editors, I'll send them a 1-line or a 2-line email saying, I'm going here when I was traveling. I'm going here. Are you interested in a story that touches on these things? Or I can do what you call a soft pitch, which is, do you reckon you might be interested in something like this? If you are, I can come back with more details. And I found that soft pitching with people that you know works really, really well. So you're not spending heaps of time fleshing out an entire pitch, but you're just getting you're taking the pulse to see if there's an appetite for that story. And it saves you a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, it does. And I guess that comes through having the relationship. What about cold pitching? So I know as myself, as a decision maker within Rounded, I get cold pitches every day from all over the world of people trying to sell me stuff. I can also tell you that some of the best people we work with today are people who have pitched me cold, but done it properly. Okay, so can you share some advice or some insights into how to put together a cold pitch?
Yeah, okay. So number one is that you understand who the organisation is and who the people are and what their vision or purpose is and what they're trying to achieve. So for me, before I cold pitch or send a letter of introduction to an organisation, if they're producing content, I want to understand what the purpose of their content is, because not many organisations are just making content without a purpose. Do they want to engage? Do they want to educate an audience? Do they want to convert people? What is the primary purpose? Are they building content so that they're establishing themselves as a thought leader within the space. What is it? So I want to reflect that in my letter of introduction to them. So you want to introduce yourself and say if you are a specialist in that particular area. So if you're a finance writer and you're approaching around it, or someone with experience in writing about accounting systems, then you would mention that. If you have a background as an accountant but you're a new freelance writer, then I would mention that. You want to kind of shine a spotlight on those parts of your experience and skills that are going to be appealing to the potential client. I think where lots of freelancers fall down is that they put all the focus on them. I'm reliable, I'm competent, I'm this, I'm that. And actually you should be focusing on how you can solve the potential client's problems. And so what is it that your content or your designs will do for them? How does that fit into the vision that that company has and where they want to go?
100% agree. Brilliant advice. So yeah, for those of you that are thinking about trying to improve your pitching game, putting all of your focus on the person that you're pitching to, rather than at this stage, necessarily leading with your own skills or abilities, completely changes the game. So yeah, totally get that, Lindy. Absolutely. So actually now we'll go back to one of the questions that comes from John. And he said, what do you do when you have pitched to an editor who you've worked with often and they fail to respond? And so you follow up 2 to 3 times and they continue to fail to respond. At what point do you decide to push on with the client or leave them alone and look for a new outlet? And how do you do that without ruining the relationship with the existing client who is now not responding?
I think this is pretty common, and I definitely have had editors who have become friends who do this. And my sense is I let that go. I let that, if it's a one time only, I let that pitch go and I take that as a sign that they're not keen. I don't frame that as a relationship or a connection breakdown. I would then pitch again as almost as if nothing had happened. If you're seeing that you're contacting someone and you're getting lots of silence, then I would probably give it a break, and it might not have anything to do with your pitch, your ideas, your stories, your designs, whatever it is. It might just be the space that they're in. I definitely have had clients go cold or go quiet on me because they're having like an internal restructure and they just don't even have the headspace to reply.
Yeah. And so there's another, perhaps taking that to the next stage of that question, which is, how do you deal with no? What's the best way to deal with no? Because it's going to be a fact of life, right? You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. You may even at the beginning lose way more than you win. Yeah. So how do you, what's your mindset around dealing with no?
Well, I see it as feedback initially. And look, I have to say, it's bruising. It's really bruising to get a rejection and it stings. So, but after that subsides, I think it's really healthy to see it as feedback, either about your ideas or the position that the client or the magazine or publication is in at that moment. I also see if you get a response, that's starting a conversation. And lots of times I've got a no, and then I've been able to reply and say, I'm sorry that this didn't hit the mark. If I haven't already asked for contributor guidelines, do you have some submission guidelines that I could take a look at and make sure that my pitch is, more fully formed for next time? Or are there particular stories that you're looking for right now? Sometimes you won't get a reply to that kind of general ask, but if they've taken the time to say no, I see that as a potential for an opening to a conversation.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I guess asking them the question, as I say, it's a learning opportunity to know that next time you can be that much better based on the feedback that you've got. Yeah. Excellent. So moving on then, and again, guys, please keep the questions coming. We are going to get through them. I can see a couple in the Facebook Live feed and plenty in the Zoom room, so we're going to keep going. But I wanted to talk to you about your process for researching a new piece, whether it's something that you're sort of speculatively doing or whether it's a commission that you've got. Is there a way that you go through it? And I guess to respond to Chris's question, he says, I have ideas, but struggle forming them into a pitch that editors will pick up. So I guess that there's, you were saying that there's a difference between the idea and the story. So I guess it's responding to that and working out how do you turn the idea into the story, and what's your creative process for going through that?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's about not stopping at that first stage. So I think, kind of a topic might be, COVID-19 in nursing homes. But that's not really a story. But if your story, so you've kind of got the top level of that idea, but then if you can funnel that down and drill down to a particular story idea, so you might think, okay, COVID-19 in nursing homes, are there nursing homes that manage to keep COVID-19 out? How do we do that? So that is a very specific story idea. So I think it's about really narrowing your focus down, picking one part of that story and following it through. I also do like the friends test. So if I'm at a party or a barbecue and I talk about it with friends, do they latch on? Are they interested in having a conversation about this thing, and where does that go? Often I think that is a way to refine your pictures too. And in terms of researching, for me, I think I'll talk about magazines and publications first. It's about initially, number one thing is, have they run a story on this previously? And lots of us use the little search function on a website. That's not always the best way to do it, because if it's a print publication, they may not put everything online. Also, some of those search engines within a publication's homepage, they don't pick up everything. So if you type into Google, site, SITE, and then a semicolon, and then you do the web address, no space, of the publication, then you do a space and you do your keywords, that will scrape the site and find up all the articles so that mention your keywords. So that's kind of like the basic 101 thing that you should do, because there's nothing worse really than pitching an editor for them to come back and say, we ran that last week. Like, it's kind of old news, or we've just done that, because it really shows that you're not keeping up to date with their publication.
I've just tried to recreate that in chat. I don't know if you can see it, Lindy.
Yes.
Would that be the structure?
Yes, although you need your www at the front of rounded, so that should work.
So yeah, okay. So guys, those of you looking in the chat, apart from the www.beforerounded.com.au, you can put that into the Google search bar, and that will help search a particular website for a keyword that you might be looking for, to sort of understand if they've got any prior content around that. Yeah.
And you can do that too. Sometimes with online publications, you're not sure if your story has gone up yet. And so that's another way that you can just search for your name after the publication's web address, URL, and see if your story's been published or not.
So I think what you're saying though, sort of, is that it's as important to do research on the publication as it is to do research on the story, because you could miss the mark either way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in terms of the corporate, like if I wanted to pitch to Rounded or send a letter of introduction to you guys, then I would be using LinkedIn to see how big your company is. I would be looking at your website. I would think, what kind of content are you producing? Like, do you have a blog? Do you have fact sheets? Are you producing videos and then have an article to accompany that video? Do you have case studies? If you don't have any of that stuff, and if you're not producing content, then you're probably unlikely to have a use for a content writer. So I probably wouldn't bother pitching you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's probably better uses of your time, right? So
yes. Yeah. And it takes time. That research phase can take time. And I think, again, that's why you want to look at this in a strategic way, and in a way that gives you sustainability and longevity to your freelance career. Because if you're having to research 20 individual different publications because you've got all these ideas, that's taking you much more time than if you thoroughly analyze one publication or companies within your niche or industry and go after them.
Yeah, I get that. There's also that analogy about, if I had 4 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend 3 hours sharpening my axe.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, do you have a sort of, again, like a minimum level of time that you'll spend on research? Is there, versus how long it takes to write a piece? Is there a correlation between the length of the piece or the publication and the amount of research that you do?
Yeah, I try to spend as little time as possible, which horrifies some people. And I was talking to a freelance writer who's quite new the other day, and she was saying that she wanted to, this is before she'd even pitched her story, wanted to interview everybody who and wanted to interview 4 or 5 people for like an 800-word story. And I just think you're just spending so much time and investing in resources when you don't know if that story is going to get commissioned or not. So for me, I tend to be really analytical. So I have a story idea. I look at the publication and see whether they've published it previously. I see if they've got contributor guidelines, if I haven't written for them before, or if I'm familiar with them, then I have a good idea, a good sense that this idea is going to fit. If the story hinges on particular case studies, so if the story is about some new research and I need to talk to those researchers and I'm not sure that they're going to be available or willing, I'll reach out to them first and I will say, I'm really keen to write a story about your new research. These are the kind of publications I'd be looking at pitching. If I get commissioned, would you be interested in speaking with me for this story? So I kind of test them out first because I know that my pitch is going to be solely reliant on them saying yes.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So guys, again, everybody listening, plenty of time for questions. We're going to go to another question now from Amanda. And she said, I started pitching last year after pivoting from doing just copywriting. I've secured 7 or so commissions so far with a couple of follow-up stories, but I haven't been able to position myself as a regular for more ongoing work or columns. The Adelaide Advertiser's South Australian Weekend magazine, for example. How would you suggest improving my chances of getting more bylines with a few key publications?
Well, I think initially, Amanda, well done, because I think sometimes that shift from copywriting to editorial style writing can be really tricky. So to get 7 commissions is fabulous. So well done. I think there is an article on my website where I speak to 3 columnists, 3 Australian columnists, and they talk about how they landed their columns. So yep, if you go to my website, then you can use my search bar and it will work, I hope, and just type in landing a column. But I think it's just about really being top of mind, being present, and getting to the point where you are a trusted and known contributor. I think you want to have a backlog of content that you've written for those publications before you pitch a column. And then if you see an opportunity for a column that you think that you could regularly write, I would have that conversation with the editor and propose 6, 7, 8 ideas for that column so that they know that it's not just like a flash in the pan and that you've only got one idea and then it's going to fizzle out.
Cool. Well, hopefully that's of some help to you, Amanda. So, Lindy, if we're going to start sort of thinking about takeaways and things that the people who are here today are going to, it's going to hopefully help them for 2021 and beyond. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sort of a tip list or a top 3 bits of advice or whatever it may be that you would sort of put as this is going to help make your pitch stand out?
Yeah, so I think initially, like, the subject line of your email is really important. So if you're sending a letter of introduction to a corporate client, I think you want to say something in your subject line like freelance writer or freelance designer specializing in accounting software or whatever it might be to catch the eye of that organization and that person. And then I think for freelance writers, if you're pitching to magazines, newspapers, online platforms, you want to put in freelance pitch in your subject line because they receive so many pitches, but they also receive lots of pitches from public relations people. And you don't want them taking your story idea thinking that you are a public relations person. So make sure that you say freelance pitch. And then in your subject line, you want to reflect the subject headings that publication uses. So if they're a publication that uses listicles like the 5 ways to do this, mimic that in your subject line. Or if they do lots of plays on words, use plays on words in your subject line. And if you're having to follow up a pitch, keep the same subject line but change it to follow up. So you say follow up, freelance pitch, and then whatever your subject line was.
Excellent. And do you yourself have a structure for follow-ups? Like in terms of, is it different for if you know the client or whatever, it's like, well, this person, if they don't respond, I now know that I've got no chance. I'm not even going to bother. But this person, they're a bit flaky. So sometimes it takes 2 or 3 goes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do. I generally follow up all my pitches, and I say something like, just checking in to see if you saw my pitch, and I keep it within that original email thread. Sometimes I'll copy and paste and put it back up, and then I'll say to them, and I think this is really important. I say to them, I know you're incredibly busy, so if I don't hear back from you by date, give them a few days or to the end of the week, I'll assume it's a pass and look to pitch this elsewhere. So let them know that you're going to move on and that you're going to pitch it to someone else. And sometimes I've had editors saying, oh, thanks for the prompt. Yes, I do want this. And sometimes you won't hear anything, but then at least you know that they're not going to come back to you 3 weeks later and say, I want that story, and actually you've sold it elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you sell a story, obviously to someone, then that's pretty much an exclusive deal, right? You can't then go and flog it to someone else.
It depends on what your contract says. So sometimes you will have the right to sell it after a particular period of publication. I definitely have had, and this is something else I just wanted to mention. I've got lots to say, obviously, but I've definitely had situations where I have used parts of stories or I've been interviewing an expert and they've said something really interesting that maybe is not quite related to the story I'm writing, but I think that's another story idea. So one example is maybe 18 months ago, was at an opening of a pet-friendly hotel in Melbourne. And I just posted on Instagram that I was staying here and I had a commission for that story. And an editor that follows me said, oh, I noticed that you're at that hotel. Could you write me a story? So I had to negotiate with him to write a story about that pet-friendly hotel, but in a different way that didn't compromise my original commission. So you can definitely split a story in multiple ways. And that's a really smart way of kind of doing the work once, gathering the data, the research, visiting the place once, but then having multiple income streams from that one visit or one chunk of research that you've done.
Yeah, right. Interesting. And actually, the questions that we've got now sort of follow on from that. We've got one from the Facebook Live feed from Anferni. Hi, Anferni. And he says, at what point during the pitch process do you specify that 1, you're looking to get paid, and 2, your rate for producing the content?
Oh, good question. Okay. So once they've said that, yes, I'm interested in whatever it is, your content, your design, you have the conversation then about pay. So you say, as we haven't worked together before, could I confirm whether you have a usual rate of pay or whether you'd like me to quote you for this piece of work, this article, whatever it is. So have the conversation upfront, because loads of freelancers don't have that conversation and then maybe don't end up getting paid, or getting paid peanuts for a huge chunk of work. And then the same, it depends. If it's a corporate client, I have a template that I use, which is a tiered template about the different kind of bundles or packages that they can get for my services. And so the basic bundle is pretty much just the words and no SEO research and one set of revisions. And then it kind of gets more and more expansive and more expensive as you move through the different bundles.
Yeah, okay. And I think we could probably do an entirely separate webinar on pricing and having that discussion. I know that that's maybe something we can do down the track, but I'd actually told myself today that we weren't going to get dragged too heavily into pricing, because it would have been a massive tangent. But on the same note, we've got a question and a comment from Karina. So it's quite a bit of information here, so bear with me. She said, I live in a 1 newspaper town and I've tried pitching stories for the weekend edition of my paper, which tends to have more feature style pieces. I pitched 3 story ideas, but they were rejected. I tweaked the pieces and pitched them to the op-ed desk, which were published all 3 items without any changes or hesitation. Because the stories were for the op-ed section, I didn't get any money for them, but I do have some pieces to add to my very early portfolio. I've also published a few things in channels like Thrive Global. At what point do you stop writing for free just to build a portfolio of examples?
Now, stop writing for free now. I think because you have samples now, Karina, so I think you have got those clips that prove that you can write. I would start pitching and getting paid for your work. And I think if you live in a fairly small regional town, like I do too, there are so many opportunities because you are on the ground in that town to then approach national or even international publications about if there are exciting, interesting new trends or things happening. And so my first piece for The Guardian was about like a little cafe that was starting up as a social enterprise. And so I wondered whether regional towns were in, whether more and more social enterprises were starting up in regional towns, and they were. And so if you kind of keep your eyes open to those local stories, you can pitch them to a much wider audience.
Excellent advice. So guys, we're coming up to quarter two. And so if you do have questions for Lindy, now's the time to get them into chat or to get them into the Facebook Live feed. We have a more general question actually from Jenny, who asks, wondering what your view of the travel writing market is at the moment. What are you seeing in the current environment?
It's pretty flat at the moment. I'm seeing like a huge emphasis on domestic travel, but that said, lots of my regular outlets, their pages have shrunk in terms of how many pages they're producing because it's linked to advertising. And so there's a backlog of content. So my regular editors are saying, don't pitch us at the moment. That said, in the middle of COVID, I had a huge opportunity which I took to write domestic travel content for Australia.com. So there are still people commissioning travel content. I think it's just a bit trickier, and I think if you can change it to travel news stories like the future of travel, those kind of stories, travel tech, you can still write about travel, but it's not so much destination based, I'm finding at the moment.
So are you finding you're having to totally adapt your writing style and what you're used to try and create stories another way? Because you can't go to the places that you would have otherwise gone to? Yeah,
that's exactly it. And I think because despite all the kind of popular opinion, like I don't have a niche, like I'm a generalist freelance writer. And so when things did, everything kind of stopped. Like I had heaps of trips cancelled when COVID hit. But because I still do health and lifestyle and I do business writing, I think that kind of helped kind of see me through that. But at the moment, I'm not sure really what travel is going to look like. So I'm just kind of, for me, I'm kind of going back to my original days of a little bit of travel is really nice to have, but it won't be like my main income for a while.
Yeah. And so more broadly then, tell us what does 2021 hold for Lindy? What are you when you think about the next 12 months, how have you pivoted? How have you changed your approach? What are you thinking of in terms of making sure that you're keeping your business, moving and continuing to earn a good income?
Yes, I've really changed. Like 2021, probably because everything was so locked down and because I had so many trips cancelled, I had no more excuses left. So I had been talking about launching an online course for ages and ages about helping established freelance writers earn great money from their writing. And there were this is probably another webinar session about mindset issues with freelancers. And I just didn't have any excuses. So I launched that course last year and it's been really successful and I feel just thrilled about that. So I'm now working on a foundations course for people who want to break into freelance writing. And so I can see that my business is shifting and that feels really exciting to me to be in charge of earning my own income rather than being reliant on corporate clients or editors to commission me.
Well, yeah, I guess again, and that probably comes from confidence, experience, and everything that you've learned throughout the career. And so, if anybody, people who are on the webinar today, if they want to find out more about your courses, and if they want to get in, touch with you and find out more about the work that you do to provide content to help other freelancers build great businesses, where can they go to?
So if they go to thefreelancersyear.com, if I was really clever, I probably would have set up a link to my course, but I haven't done that. Talk about not being salesy. But just email me, get in touch, and I'm kind of always around. And it's just me, like I don't have a team of people. So if you email Lindy at lindyalexander.net, you'll get me. So if you've got questions or anything, but my blog has got heaps and heaps of resources, corporate writing, pitching, ideas of where to pitch. So you should be able to hopefully find lots of questions there. And I send out a regular newsletter as well.
Excellent. Well, what we'll do is as you guys know, we've recorded this. If you've registered for the Zoom webinar, we'll be sending out a recording to all of you probably early next week. We'll include links to Lindy's website so that you can get on and find her. And given the advice that she's given you about LinkedIn today, you probably can be fairly sure that you'll be able to find Lindy on LinkedIn as well.